Assalamu alaikum, and today is the 21st of the July. And last night I was basically in my room, and the last day I was basically observing the concept of the section 12 to the code of the civil procedure. That the code of the civil procedure, and the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court of the Republic of the Pakistan, and the concept of the multiplication of the judgments in the concurrence of the observations order while in the Supreme Appellate Tribunals. While I was observing the administrative tribunal cases as well, the judgments under the narration of the CLC, MLD, PLD, and NLD. When I just observed these documented out paper charts, I just observed the multiplication of the populace as well. The concept of the ultimate outburst of the population in the Pakistan is a concept which has being generated in the public alleys, and the public is not being in the positions to observe the same. I'm always in the point of confronting these points by myself as to observing, as to understanding the public issues while the public tranquilities. As I said so many times in my video statements, when I just multiply the Kanune Shahadat Order 1984, which is applicable in the whole of the territorial of the limited domains of the Pakistan, while I was totally shocked to observe the conditional barriers which is being upheld in the Supreme Judicial Councils. Well, I'm confused, and I'm the person in the whole of the Pakistan who is raising a landmark outstanding judicial question for the reformative methods of understanding of the bureaucracy as well as the technocracy in the Pakistan, that the common citizens under the deficit come family suits. Now, hereby, this term should have been considered by the Republicans, that the family come deficit suit disorder. Family come deficit suit disorder. When you just observe in the family court cases, family suits, that when you just observe that the cases are being maneuvered and the public is not in the positions to observe the same, then you come up with the next thought that the civil suits which are being compiled by the publicans in the public sector is a question under the bleak reservations order as well. I just observed the section 12.2. My first case was the section 12.2 clause 2 of the Code of the Civil Procedure 1908, amended one in the Civil Court Lahore. After completion of my LLB degree, I just have a good time during the started off my practice. I just there when I just observed that the most often of the times it comes in the public domains that the uh, providing of the non-sufficient amounts of the digital amounts. And what is the benefit of the WhatsApp? What should be very reserved itself, that the value of the WhatsApp judgments, narrations itself is binding on the court or not is a question which is not being acknowledged by the subordinate individuals in the Pakistan. So I advocate gulraiz-king, the comparative constitutional advocate itself, just reform the Republican sectors, that when we just apply the conditional barriers, what comes next in the public sector is a question of the landmark judicial obligation, which is not being defined by the public sectors. The concept of the artificial mediums of the incomes and the expenses, and after not providing the same to the state bank and the other reciprocating banks, what the next target is being achieved by the Republican is a question mark, which is not being self entertained by the same in the fact of the scientific approved era of science and technology as well. When I just confine these types of the issues in the public sector, I come up with the next thought that the Article 199 in the constitutional domains of the Pakistan appears to be the barriers to the Article 184 clause 1, subclause 2 and 3 of the Constitution of the 1973. But when we just crossed the the whole of the cases of the same, the question which is being deferred in every sector of the court in the Pakistan is a question which is being observed, which should have been reserved with the same impact. But despite of that, what we observe in the public sector that the number game. The Republicans, the central divisional benches in the central litigant in interest in the whole of the Pakistan, are and were not willing to understand the ultimate outburst of the aggressive race amounts of the females is a question which I just advocate to raise Ishfaq itself always raise under the slogan of itself that why and how they just communicate ultimate defection clauses in the public sector that they are not willing to extend their mental approach as to understand the same in fact the concept of the multiple disordered individuals that is a prolonged term when a statutory body itself is confined with the ultimate aggressive tools of the multiple degrees of the females population, then the factors of the same is a question which is not being subjected in the sectors of the mathematical equations of the same in fact of the science and technocratic reserved reserved obligations of interest in the reciprocating judgmental area of the science. When I just observe the poverty factors of the Republicans due to not having the capacitated seats, and when I just observe the huge quantum of not being compiled the public sector documented facts into the documented sheets, I come up with the next thought automatically that the youth under the subordinate points. I just observe these points by myself. That's why I'm raising a landmark judicial obligation is not in the positions to observe themselves that why they were born and what is the medium of their reconciled bread ascertainment despite of all these ingredients, which are the elements in which such youth under the deficit disorder of their surrounding is confined into having not a point of reflection of the perfect mediums of scientific approved transaction as well. We, the Central Republicans, always try to testify the best of us, and the rest of us assume that person who is just raising the slogan for his family. I just observed that fact as well. That he is just raising the sound because of the non-vocalization issue. I'm the person who just raised a landmark judicial obligation question that there must be the teams because I observed that there is a raised amount of the unemployed individual in the Pakistan. So I confine myself to observe the rest of the questions of the public importance by myself under my judicial observation and reserve points of the existence to the fact of the pre-existent era thereby. When I just multiply myself with the rest of the population of their existence, then it comes before me very obviously that the Republicans are not in the positions to observe the question of the Republicans. The concept of becoming a publican, despite of the Republican, is an outstanding area of the public resolution of the same. In fact, but the same syntax of errors in the public sector. I said syntax of errors in the public sector, which should have been reserved with the better lines of the interest of the same, is a question which is not being prosecuted or is rescued by either sector of the same, is a question. I raise a landmark outstanding judicial question for the reformative sectors for the kind primary and the secondary sort of the individuals that if the females being manipulated, being harassed, and the males of the same are in the positions to just harass the children of the same. I just observed the Dobry come constitutional motivated cases in my youth and during my youth practicing area. Still, I'm young, but I was very young when I just started the practice of the Dobry cases in the public sector. I just observed the non-maintenance of the females' Dobry issues in the public sector, and in the Pakistan and the India, especially in the Middle East, the limited groups of the individuals are not and were not in the points to provide the basic amenities to life to the females after being married to the same infect, and such males observed and such male want to have the perfect sort of the generation through such a female which is being manipulated by the male infect and the confined with the sect of that. The concept of the demoralized transaction of the atmospheric disorder the concept of the observation of the public disasters, the concept of the non-compilations of the proper line and length of the control of the public wastage, the concept of the public not to understanding the public itself is a question which is not being prosecuted by the same in fact in any sector of the public reform sector in the central divisional benches of the Pakistan. The central divisional of the benches of the Pakistan are trying to convince themselves that they were found as to selling of the paper documentations despite of uh, assuming the power via the Article 184 clause 1 to 3 of the Constitution of the 1973. As a lordship, I observe these facts by myself that the rest of the Republicans are not in the positions to observe the best of the judgments and surrounded by the Republicans in despite of the Republicans. When I just consume this fact that there is a difference between Republican and Republican, then I come up with the next thought that the Republicans are not in the positions to observe the observation order of their fiscal deficit disorder as well. When I just confine all these depiction of the true facts of the Republicans, then I come up with the next thought. That is an automated thought of mine, which I just consume by myself that the public is being dispelled and repelled under the dictation of their families' resolved transactions. Though these issues are being very repulsive and the compulsive in nature, when I just try to deter these points with the detriment of the life of the Republicans, the public is against their own veracity itself. When I just multiply the investment capital culture in the politics, I observe these factors that in the Pakistan it is very easy to become a politician, to have a female of a primary person. This is my favorite case. Is right the Article 199 multiplied by the Article 184 in the whole of the Supreme Judicial Council, that it is very easy to contest an election petition, election commission in the central reserve points of the central Pakistan. First, you just have a female of a wrong side from a wrong male, and after that, you just when you just found that she have a lot of the capital and in the reverse bank statements, you just get married to the same in fact, and after that, you just want to expect the modesty after having the being reserve points of children, and she become a point of auto blackmailing children in fact in the Supreme Judicial Council because of the retroactive reproduction of the said male in question who is contesting the election petitions in the whole of the Pakistan is found and are being found as to in the contraband of the Benami Transaction Act 2017 in my Judicial Court of Justice, and the same individuals are trying to convince the surrounding that the properties and the managerial areas belong to the same in fact, but not to the federal government of the Pakistan and not to the provincial government of the Pakistan. But that was not a fact, and that is not a fact at law under the subordination points of the admiration of this advanced art of the advocate Gulraiz-King. Thereby, I have to retreat my senses that wherefrom these whereabouts of the general message and deficit disorder is confined to rest of the when the price hike is at the sky rock limit and the public is about to rotate in the sector of not compiling of the issues of the same in the confinement of the reserved points of the same under the NAB observations order by the NAB Ordinance 100 amended one and applied one in Pakistan, and the FIA rules. When all of these subordinate individuals are confined with to have the proper line and length of the incomes, then why the hell the e-stamp paper is being launched in the public sector when the public itself is not confined with the rest of the best observation of the same in fact is a question now. The confinement of the central victimized individual in the Pakistan is a question which is not being rescued by the side of the same in fact. The concept of the intellectual property rights, there are the organizations, but what the hell the organizations are being repatriated in the Pakistan is a concept, the originator when I just cross study the law statutes of the copyright ordinance 1962, thereby I come up with the next thought that if the person who is trying to have the intellectual copyrights, the same person if first he has to or she has to launch a copyright protected information in the intellectual property rights office. After that, he has to originate the income through the personal sort of the domains, but the said domain is not free because of the public tranquility out of the public sector is a question against the same subjected individual in the Pakistan as per my dictations of the judicial insights of the same fact. The targets of the proxy wars through the India and the Pakistan is a secondary question which is not being consumed by the publicans. And I, the advocate gulraiz-king, is observed that these questions that the internal and external proxy wars through the internet and to spoiling the youngsters and the females of the Pakistan is an objective question which is not being subjected in any writ petition, while the constitutional mandate is still there, and there is no judicial officer and there is no person who is trying to beat the odds with the basic amenities of the usage of the consumers under the Consumers Act 2005, whereof when I just cross study all of the reciprocating area of the laws, I just come up with the legislation enactment by myself. I become legislator by myself. So I have invested a lot of 15 years now. From 20s to 33, I just invested 13 years constructive in the nature of the pre-existence of myself every day in and night out. Thereby, when I just consider the central litigant offshore companies, and the proxy companies, thereby I come up with the next thought that the origination of the wealth into the capitals in hand is a question which is subjected with the public sanctions through public observations because of the public non-compilation of the same in fact. As to observing the digital documentations in the wrong directions under the compilation of the wrong electricity bill consumption is a question which is not being a declaratory under the declaratory civil suits in any civil law. In the Pakistan, I observed that the declaratory suits are not in the points of the observation of the proper line and length of the control of the electricity charges through the tax returns through the section 114 clause 1. When I just observe the wealth statements of the residents of the Pakistanis, I just come up with the next thought that the prime purpose of the filing of the return and the wealth is not confined with the true impeachment of the rest of the restoration order of the judgments in the best reserve points. When I just observe the cross multiplication of the digital documentation, I just come up with the next thought automated by myself that the central litigant in interest in the question of the public important landmark judicial obligation is a question which is not being addressed to the same by the same in fact is a question which is not being redressed by the controversial points of the uh, sectarian groups in the Pakistan. I'm always confined by myself and I just observe these points. The confinement of the documentation from the judicial organs is a basic negligence of the civil driven individuals that not to file the cases in the proper line and length of the control as to just hide beside the judgments and beside the pre-motivated judgments and the interlocutory order and the interlocutory judgments. When I just observe all of these series of the scenarios which are being a scenario scene and not a true depiction of the facts in existence, when I just observe the public sector that those Republicans are trying to beat the odds, what the prime social sect or section should be inserted in the prime social syntax error. So I'm just trying to be the point of the federal Shariat law and the federal consolidated cases in the Pakistan that every court in the Pakistan is appealed by this advocate Gulraiz King to have the observation order through the syntax or a recovery order. Syntax or error recovery order. I'm just compiling to the same in fact that syntax recovery order is the time being for from the every court of the judicial side that syntax recovery order, the syntax manipulation and the syntax derailed and the achievements of the same is a question in the Supreme Judicial Council which is not being addressed by even the judicial insights and the judicial official mandates and the capacitated subordinate of the same. the whole of the depictions of the facts and the cases in the civil subordinate courts under the high courts, under the Lahore High Court, under the Islamabad High Court. Those courts are trying to beat the drums of the judgments which are predeceased and not motivated one. I just consume these facts by the advanced arts of the ultimate observation of mine. I just invested every capital and non-capitalized amounts in myself. That's why I'm just raising the landmark judicial outstanding question by myself, even without reading a statute. The question, which is not in the statutory body and the local residential mediums of the Pakistan, while you can observe the prime social sector as well, that the guardian suits. The guardian suits means the guardian ad litem plus the guardian de facto. In Pakistan, there is a difference between the guardian ad litem suits and the de facto guardians. When we just observe the de facto guardians, the de facto guardian means that the person is in fact a guardian, but the same person is not have the entitlement of the documentation of the record of the national identity of the same. And the question of the concept of the same is to understand the guardian ad litem as well as my judicial insight of the litigant in interest in the central supreme judicial councils of the restoration order, that despite of all these constructive falsifying in the cases of the negligence of the public sector, what we just observe everywhere we just go, we just observe the malified intention of the Republicans to become a publican, despite of portraying to be the best piece of the judgment to the rest of the surrounding. What we just consider is the question of alarming situations in the Supreme Judicial Council by our sleeves under the black coat. So when I just consider these all points by myself, then the central litigant interest, which are in the point of the battles and which are not in the positions to narrate the facts in the true controversial mediums of the facts, I appeal to the Supreme Judicial Council in the Supreme Court of the Pakistan to raise a landmark outstanding judicial order that there must be no Urdu language, there must be no Punjabi, there must be no Pashto. Despite of all these languages, there must one language is prevailing, and that is called English. That American English would prevail in every court, because the British English is expired in every sector. We are following the British laws in the Pakistan, and I'm not willing to understand that why we are still following the British laws in the Pakistan. Despite of that, we should consider the American laws in the Pakistan, because the American laws prevail in the DNA testifying. If any female is suffering from the brutalized sort of the rape by the public person in the public sector, then who is going to conduct the DNA test? If the person is not being having the forensic DNA specialization degrees, therefore the judgments would prevail in the same negated police station, and the police station would not be in the positions to uphold the stream yard areas of the same, in fact through the SP of the same in charge lines in the civil lines of the civil affairs of the Republicans, as per my dictations. The question which I just observed, that the females, after being stroked by the layman in the Pakistan, is a very easy task to become a fountain of the traumatic disorder, after being reserved with the point of the inclined type of the deferred transactions through the same. If she be found in the public courts, the question again becomes in the administrative cost negated channels, and she being harassed over and over becomes an outstanding area to the same, and to be a point to confine her sexual intercourses with the same subject of the deferred and inferred individual as a matter of grace. And therefore all of them suddenly provoke the religion statements, the religious statements. That's the way I'm just considered this question, that the religious statement is never been and would not be appealed in every court of justice. You can consume that if you were very religious, then why the hell you were in the court, why the hell you are in the police station, why the hell you are in the administrative tribunal? These three factors should have been compiled by you in your home house. The concept of the house and home in the Pakistan is not being observed by the Pakistani. The question of the tenant at will under the subordination of the administrative cost negated bodies is a question which is not being in the compulsive behavior of the same. These are my experimental issues which I just reserve by myself under the reserve years of my self exposures to the public sector through the 13 years of my practicing area of the law in the inclined ways of the question of the permanent expectations of the legal controversial points of the self existence as well. The concept of the derailed and the demotivated reproductive disorder in the Pakistan is a question which is not being observed by the either sector of the Pakistan, and the concept of the same under the defection of the college universities scheming area and the proper line and length not controlled by the same is a question which is being abstracted through the material particular of the same in the objected points of the objective of the legal resolution as well. I'm just observing these all public challenges throughout my life without even having the intervention of the any court. I'm providing the intervening parties to the courts, and the courts are not trying to provide me the intervention area of practicing. And now, hereby, when they just need the help from the local and special immigrants, they just want to have the reciprocating area of the measuring transactions. But those transactions would be downstream yards as per my dictations, that when the individuals are not in the fit and compiled position as to observe the reservation order of their living under the consideration of the targets of the uh, illicit activities of the same is a question which is not being reserved by the same. They don't have the time to communicate their self in the public, self-generated and self-extreme line area of existence. I'm observing this question that the Republicans try, in order to become the publican, always try to cheat to their surrounding, even in their relationships. I found these factors of the public declined area of living. Thereby, when I just communicate the public judicial order as by my observation order, that the Supreme Judicial Council is obliged to have the compulsive order in the nature of the enhancement of the public uh, financial statement. This is my advisory to the statutory bodies of the central Pakistan, that to uh, apply an executive amount of the public you can say that the public penalty clauses, so that the public penalty clauses under the ITO 1 section 182 would be applied in the Pakistan. Yes, and that's why when I just said that the public is trying to embezzle the public properties into the other regional areas, and this is the prime precedent in custom which is being settled by the secondary and the primary both ingredients of the individuals in the Pakistan, and both of them are not in the positions to confine the rest of the position of the political embezzlement of the enhancement of the rights of the surrounding poverty belts of the same sectors under the rest of the same in Pakistan from more than a decade. I'm just consuming these factors by myself after just reserving an amount of years that is more than one decade. And thereby, when I just observe the rest of the confinement of the public in the sector of the public, I just come with the next thought, that is called sectarian hate plus the culture of the ipsi dixit and the culture of the dehumanization, the concept of the females fabricated pleas, the concept of the selling of the yardsticks of common commutation amounts, the concept of the consumption of the wrong ascertainment of the facts, the elements of the eliminated scenarios, the females under the reproduction of the females and consuming to be the males breed is a disease in Pakistan, the breed issues in the Pakistan, the after marriage issues in the Pakistan, the post traumatic marital discoveries in Pakistan, the females as a tool in order to reproduce more and much, reproductive disordered males and females in order to originate nothing despite of the capital minus degrees in Pakistan is another point which is not being observed by you as well, and I bet on that. The questions. So I'm just settled, and I have just settled the president in customs. So stay blessed and take care.